Welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show, where you'll learn how to grow your team today. Join Ken Trupke and his guests as they discuss what works and doesn't work to grow your team in today's world. And now, your host, Ken Trupke.
Hello, and welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show. Mergers and acquisitions, or M&A as it's known, is common in most industries. But one industry people don't often think about for M&A is agriculture. Well, my guest today, Joe Mosher, founder of the Mosher Consulting Group, specializes in helping agribusinesses execute on their mergers and acquisitions. So here to tell us more about that, Joe Mosher. Joe, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So who are your clients with Mosher Consulting and what problem do you solve for them?
So we work primarily with small to mid-market, privately or cooperatively held ag supply chain companies or ag value chains. So think seed companies, crop inputs, ag retail, co-ops, grain handlers, feed manufacturers, flour millers, things of that nature. Again, kind of in the small to middle market size and not in the public markets. What we do is we really help them undertake and successfully execute strategy, but specifically around the M&A side. So in cases where they may not have the internal resources or the capabilities available to help them realize the maximum value from their M&A activity. M&A, of course, being mergers and acquisitions. So these businesses, they have in-house capabilities to run the business as it is today. But given their size, they don't always have access to the tools or maybe the talent that's been through a bunch of transactions to help them navigate these really big moments in their business's trajectory to kind of help them create the business they want. So they're not lacking smarts. They're mostly lacking just maybe the time and the experience to do this. And so that's where we come in and kind of help them episodically navigate these big moments in history.
All right. Now, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions, advisors, brokers, firms out there. What makes you and Mosher Consulting unique?
Well, it's true. There are a lot of them. I would say there's fewer that are uniquely or exclusively focused on the ag value chain space. There's a handful of them, and I could name a few of them here that I think are particularly strong. But what does make us different is that we're not on the front end of the M&A lifecycle. So we don't generally help bring a seller to market. We don't advise buyers in doing valuation or due diligence on their acquisitions. We don't broker those relationships or hold a public auction process. We come in sort of after the deal has gone through due diligence or is in due diligence with a very high likelihood to close. And we help them get ready for the demands of what's going to happen after they close. Because that's typically where a lot of the value destruction occurs, is there's a lot of energy and support around making the deal. But then when it comes to, once the deal's been consummated, how do we bring these two enterprises together? How do we make sure that we can ship product, that we can invoice, that we can collect, that we can pay bills, that we have a standard message to the marketplace, that we've done the work to make sure we have a complementary suite of products, all these things that occur after the case that often, in my experience, tend to be neglected just for a variety of reasons. But there's fewer folks out there that help on that back end side of the transaction. And there's even fewer that do that back end support within the ag value chain space. So that's really our niche. That's where we focus, and it's a really exciting space to be in.
Sure. Now, you've got a podcast, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But in the podcast, like right at the beginning, the kind of the intro tagline is M&A often destroys more value than it creates. Tell me what makes you say that, and then how companies can avoid those traps and actually have a successful merger that creates value.
Yeah. So, that there's more to it than that. So there's a pretty commonly cited statistic, and I don't know, I did some work a while back trying to actually trace back the breadcrumbs of where did this proclamation come from? And that's this thing that 70 to 90% of M&A fails to meet expectations and destroys value. And the challenge is, one, every time I try to do the research on that, saying where did it come from, all I get is this death spiral of one article citing another article, and you can never actually get back to the actual study. So maybe that opening on the show should be changed. But I think what is clear is that relative to the risk and the capital deployment and the strain and demands it puts on people and customers and suppliers, a lot of deals fail to deliver what they're expected to deliver. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But what I've observed is if we assume that the transaction made sense, meaning it fit their business model, it aligned with what they're trying to create from a strategy perspective, they didn't overpay, assuming all those things are true, where I see a lot of the value destruction happening is once the deal is consummated, there's a tendency to move away from really staying rooted in why did you do the deal in the first place? Yeah. So the economics of the deal structure change, of course, through the negotiation process. But as an overly simplified example, you'll see transactions a lot of the time where there'll be a press release that'll say something to the effect of, we're really excited to provide a full suite of solutions to our farmer customers, and really sort of banging the drum around all the value it's going to have for the producer, for the American farmer, because now we've got this complementary capabilities that we're bringing into a one-stop shop. And then you look at the integration plan, and it's all about, well, we need everybody to be on the same payroll system by day 30. Or it's really important that from a treasury perspective, we have it all consolidated. We really need to make sure that everybody who's driving one of our tender trucks is wearing the same polo shirt with the new logo. All important. None of that was in the press release, right? There's no reason you went out and bought a business because you're really excited about a new logo and buying more polo shirts for drivers. And so over time, people tend to move away from why they did the deal. The other thing that I think is a real problem is there's a lack of alignment around what was that post integration entity supposed to look like. So if Ken Co is buying Joe Co, did you intend to buy my business and operate it as a holding company where we would just kick up revenues and you basically bought it for the cash flow and you intended to change nothing? Or did you have a bunch of back office processes that could standardize the way we do our work, and that's how you're going to drive value? So you were largely going to integrate the back office, but leave us alone. Or did you actually say, no, we actually want to buy all the IP, all the resources, we want to buy the customer list, we want to buy the brand, and we're going to fold it all in on the Clarity Advisors. When that's not clear, imagine how effective the integration planning is, right? Because finance is going to want to have it fully integrated. Sales might have a different point of view. HR might have a different point of view, et cetera. And so that's where things also get tripped up. And the last thing I'll say here is one of the things we really focus on with our clients is building an integration plan around the concept of a minimum viable integration, meaning if you know why you did the deal, and if you know what the level of integration required is to deliver against that objective, what's the minimum number of things you can do to start generating a return on that transaction? And we're not saying the minimum is all you do, but you don't do much else until you've hit that. And so this is where you kind of folds into all these problems kind of collapse in upon themselves. And ultimately you get to a year or 2 years later and you still have, what's funny is you didn't provide that on that full suite of services to the farmer. And people might still be wearing different polo shirts in the trucks too, because you try to do everything at once and suddenly nothing worked. And it causes a bunch of frustration and exhaustion. It grinds on your customers. Your suppliers don't know what to expect from you. So I can go on and on there, but that's the way we see the world and where we really try to put our shoulder into it to benefit for the client.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I really like that MVI, that minimum viable integration, let's get something done and then move on to the next thing. And you just keep pushing things across the goal line rather than try to tackle it all and maybe, I'd rather move one thing 100 yards than 100 things 1 yard. And because,
exactly right.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned that agriculture, agribusiness is the niche, and that's part of what makes you guys unique is working in that space. Is M&A new to agribusiness, or is there more activity recently, or has this kind of always been a thing? It's just under a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, it's always in the time that I've been in the industry, it's always been a part of life. I think in certain segments you see acceleration or deceleration over time, but it's a pretty important part of how agribusinesses grow. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'll try not to get too far into the weeds unless you want me to go there. But if we set the context, if we think about grain handlers or, again, feed manufacturers, flour millers, even some of the upfront businesses that are doing, seed and crop protection sales, there's a lot of R&D on that side. But further down the chain, it's very capital intensive, it's asset heavy, and then you have all of that upfront cost with a very thin margin structure in the commodity markets, right? Relative to a SaaS business, right? Where you're at 70, 80% gross margins. So when you take that capital intensity, that asset heaviness, the high number of people it takes to operate them, and then you layer on thin margins, it creates barriers to entry, but it also creates some barriers to growth. And then, of course, recently here, let's layer on a high interest rate environment, right? It's going to be very hard to fund some of the big builds of sort of growing organically over time. And so, what are the drivers then of consolidation in the industry? Is many aspects of the ag supply chain, which is very complex, they still remain pretty fragmented, and that could be at the ag retail level that's selling propane and liquid fuels and crop protection and seed in a local market. It could be the crop insurance agencies, even some of the grain handlers. There's just a lot of fragmentation coupled with a lack of succession planning, which that's not unique to agribusiness. But in these small rural communities where you don't have the density of talented people, that becomes a really highlighted problem. So that's one aspect, fragmentation plus lack of succession planning. If you look a little bit in the bigger part of the chain, then at the ag co-ops, the agricultural cooperatives, which are farmer-owned businesses that will, store their grain, ship their grain, sell them inputs, et cetera, we've seen a really rapid pace of consolidation for the last 10, 15 years. And they're looking to rationalize their footprints because in many parts of the country, maybe the storage complex has been overbuilt. And so you just have excess storage. So when you consolidate, you rationalize that, and you kind of remove that problem. They're also looking to get better leverage on procuring seed and fertilizer and crop protection. So when you can buy in bigger volumes, you get better prices, and you can provide more solutions to your producer customers. So that's the second one. And then there's this general thesis or theme around tech and ag, or ag tech as it's affectionately referred to. And let me just say on the front end, folks who say that agribusiness or agriculture is one of the lowest tech adoption industries out there, I think are wholesale wrong. We have a high degree of tech adoption across the value chain. I think that we probably don't have as many solutions that have been built for problems that people are willing to pay to have solved, but it's improving. And as tech comes into the space, it unlocks a lot of value, unlocks a lot of capacity in these businesses. And then that creates the appetite to sort of say, well, let's maybe buy these technology solution providers because it's a good augmentation to our existing service offering. So if you're an ag retailer that's also doing application of pesticides, herbicides, things of that nature, buying precision ag technology that allows you to do that better, cheaper, faster, and better data aggregation becomes very attractive. So there's a lot there, but I think all these things are compounding to create a lot of M&A activity. And underlying all of this is just the fact that we generally have inelastic calorie demand in the world. People have to eat, and these businesses produce the things that either produce what we eat or produce, feed for what we eats. So there's a lot of just the secular demand curve going up and to the right as there's a growing global middle class, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of opportunity, lots of work to do.
It makes a lot of sense. I love inelastic calorie demand. Yes.
Yeah, armchair economist here. Yeah.
Yeah, we all need to eat. Listen, I want to get into some of your origin story and how you got to where you are and know what you know. And we'll do that on the other side of the break. Stay with us on the Clarity Advisors Show.
Is your business where you want it to be or on track to get there? Clarity Advisors helps business leaders improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success. We specialize in helping you streamline your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Call or text Ken at 616-822-2998 to have a complimentary 12-minute call to see what some clarity could do for you.
Okay, welcome back to the Clarity Advisors Show. Today we're talking with Joe Mosher of the Mosher Consulting Group, who works with agribusinesses to do mergers and acquisitions. So Joe, tell us about some of your early career and how you got to this place.
Yeah, so out of grad school, I'm originally from the Twin Cities. Out of grad school, had the opportunity to join Cargill, which is, depending on the year, the largest privately held company in the United States and one of the big main operators within the ag value chain. And so joined them as a hometown company and spent 12, 13 years there. And it was just a great learning lab, right? And one of the reasons I wanted to join, I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in Minneapolis. And so, but it's the intersection of, food and transportation modes, global trade policy, energy, diplomacy. I mean, there's just so many things that are built around making sure that the world has enough food, right? And taking things from times and places of surplus to times and places of deficit. It was a really interesting business. And so spent a long time there and spent a good chunk of that also within our ag supply chain North American division. Interestingly, never actually worked in an M&A integration capacity. There was not necessarily a dedicated team for that, but observed and then participated in, and then was also helping to resolve at times some of the things that were maybe born of, let's say, not ideal integration. And sometimes not even M&A related, sometimes just good strategy poorly executed. And so over time, since I never set out to work in such a large organization, I really enjoyed it. I had this thesis in the back of my head saying, well, if we struggle with all the resources that we have available, I imagine that others that are, playing equally important parts of the value chain, but are maybe smaller, don't have access to the advice and the resources and tools, et cetera, I imagine they have a need. And so, like many folks during the pandemic, had an opportunity to do something different, seized on it, and went out to test that thesis, and that's what we've been doing ever since now, like going into year 4. So my academic background, was in organization effectiveness, which is largely how do you align a team around what they're trying to do, and have subsequently been able to build a career doing that in a variety of capacities in plant operations and finance and process improvement and risk and assurance. A lot of activities all kind of around that core premise, and now I have the privilege to do that for folks that might not otherwise get that support.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you don't technically have like employees, W-2 people on your team, but you definitely have a team. I mean, nobody gets anything done by themselves, right? Yeah. We always need people around us working together. So tell me about the team that you've assembled and who you typically work with to accomplish some of these things for companies.
Yeah, so as I joked when we spoke previously, the group in Mosher Consulting Group is aspirational, maybe depending on the day. Sometimes there's an appetite for growth. Sometimes it's really comfortable to keep it small. So it's a team that flexes up or down depending on what the needs of our book of business are. And so there's a couple of different ways it falls into. Of course, from a marketing standpoint, and some of the back office activities, we work with different agencies and different service providers to kind of help not automate, but kind of relieve some of that burden from the work that I need to do in front of the clients. I own all the business development and the sales and the principal part of the execution. But in execution, there's often either capacity constraints, right? Just there's not enough hours in the day, or I am not the best suited person to do what they need done. And so I have a stable of folks that we'll bring in on a project by project basis, depending on the need, and engage them to support. And so some of that will look like, recently we had a client that was looking to implement a new ERP technology solution, and they wanted to kind of go through a formal RFP process to make sure that they understood the market and they understood what was out there. We pull someone in to help on that. I've had other times where we just needed someone that was a pure play project manager that could just ride herd, set the schedule, defend the scope, control the budget, and just get in there and make people uncomfortable. And then they could be the bad guy, and I could be the good guy. When they say, well, Joe, what they're doing is making it hurt, and I can remind them why the pain what they wanted, right? And then we also have, we leverage some offshore resources and experts from a data science perspective. So oftentimes in our engagements, we'll ask for very large troves of company transaction data so that we can understand how information flows through the business, how the work gets done, and kind of identify where maybe some of the opportunities are. And so we've got some folks that are just whip smart and really good at that work. And really, it doesn't matter where they are, as long as you can rely on them and they're credible and they get their work done. And so the group, in that sense, within the scope of my control, is there. The other thing we do, though, is on a number of times we've brought in other expert advisors to support our clients where we don't necessarily have that flow through us. So I've helped connect clients with new fractional CFOs, helped source new chief executive officers for some clients, helped bring in manufacturing expertise that maybe we don't have. And it's important. One of our core values is we don't monetize every interaction. And so sometimes if we can simply connect what we think is a good, credible, trusted advisor in the marketplace with our client to our client's benefit, we don't get too hung up on trying to, again, monetize that and have a finder's fee or take a share of it. In fact, unless it's incumbent on the project's success, we defer to, or we tend to not do that. So I can also see that as part of the group, right? They engage with us, and I have a pretty rich network of folks in the space, and via me, they might be able to get in touch with some other folks and not have to spend as much time trying to chase them down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of not trying to monetize every interaction. We all need each other. We all want to help each other. I encourage people to make friends because friends want to help friends. So just go out there and be friendly and be a friend. And there's plenty of work for everybody. If you have an abundance mindset, there's plenty to go around. So let's just throw opportunities to each other, make sure the best resources are coming together to help the clients at the end of the day.
Say one thing about that. So I would say abundance mindset is really easy to have when you have abundance. And as soon as the scarcity sets in, it's really hard to keep that. So there's pun unavoidable here, but I always think about it in terms of, am I a hunter-gatherer or a farmer? And a farmer plants seeds and then tends the crop, and it'll produce a harvest. Hunter-gatherer, yeah, you can eat right away, but you might not eat every day. And so I also think about it in terms of abundance, is I might not have abundance today, but the crop is coming. And so trying to also keep that in mind of I'm farming here and I'm planting the seeds and trying to nurture that along. Because that helps me then when the pipeline looks a little thin or when demand is going down a little bit, it helps me kind of keep my nerve, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Yeah. That's a great analogy. And it's a great way to think about to keep your head into that abundance mindset. Because when there's abundance, it's a lot easier than when there's not, for sure. So, and we tend to talk a lot on this show about teams and building and growing your team. So what are things you've learned either working with your own consulting group or back at Cargill about things that are the principles that work in leadership, or maybe some mistakes that you've seen leaders make or that you've made?
Yeah, there's so much there. One of the things that I worked very hard on as my roles and responsibilities got bigger and broader in a corporate environment, and it's challenging, right? Because you're not always able to disclose everything you know. But I always would try to bring the facts into the light, and make sure that my team understood as much of what was true and what was available. Make sure that was known. mold grows in the dark, right? And so do rumors that then fester into fact. And so I would try to share as much as I could. And then also along the way, when I couldn't share more, people know that you know more. And so I would just simply have to be honest and say, there's additional information I have that I can't tell you, because people know if you say, here's what I know. And then you stop at some sort of illogical point where like, well, who told you that? And then stop telling you that right there. I'm not buying it. And Joe, you're pretty smart. I know you didn't buy it if that happened too. And so that sows distrust. It doesn't actually shortcut the people making rumors or assumptions, et cetera. So trying to be as forthright and bringing people into the discussion processes. The other thing I try to do is be really explicit with my own assumptions and speculations. And so maybe we're getting into a situation where a business unit that we're a part of is going through a big transformation. And I say, okay, well, here's what's known. This occurred, this person said this project's happening. Now there's work happening on this. That's what we know. Now, here's what I assume is happening. And I say I assume because they also want to know what I think about it. Right? But I'm very clear with what my assumptions are or when I'm speculating, because then it helps enrich the discussion. It's not just a one-way conversation. I can also then get what are their assumptions or what are their fears, et cetera. Those two things, like I said, they're very challenging in a corporate environment at times for high sensitivity, efforts or transactions. But it just generally worked. It built a lot of trust. And it opened the door for people to ask the questions they needed. The other thing I would say, and this is not novel or new, but once you've established a team and you have the culture that's working that you want, whether that's a high independent bias for action culture or highly collaborative, we all take the next step together, or whatever it might be, depending on the need, you have to have very low tolerance for value or norm erosion. And so if people come into that team that are bringing the bar of performance down, or are maybe starting to gossip, or are maybe starting to, have sharper elbows than is necessary, I early in my career would really over-index on, well, let's coach and help that individual. And then I probably overcorrected to say, well, that person needs to go very quickly. But then I sort of found my sweet spot there where setting the expectations very clear up front. And then when people deviated from those, getting on it quickly and helping get them back on track, because it's enough work to try to get a team to a high performing stance. But man, you let it atrophy or backslide, it's twice as much work trying to recreate it. And so I just really tried to make sure that we established it and that we defended that at all costs.
Oh, that's so good. Those are some really solid points. Thanks for those. So, hey, Joe, I know as we wrap up here, you're a reader. What are you listening to, reading, podcast, videos, however you're consuming it? What are some things that have got your attention lately?
Yeah. So I see myself as partially an aggregator of information for my clients too. So I'm sort of responsible for consuming a lot of information. And so, I could go on and on and on in the podcast I listen to. There's a lot out there, but what I will tell you I try to do is I try to take the world of business and analysis. And so some of the big ones there would be like, business breakdowns, Founders, the All In podcast. These are a couple of the big ones where I get a deep dive into a business. People think about how that business operates, thinks about how the founders mindset influence their performance. Then the All In podcast, you get sort of the commentary around what's happening in the marketplace, how people might want to respond, etc. So I take all that and try to pull out the lessons learned that then can be applied in the work that I do and in the ag supply chain. And then separately, there's a variety of podcasts, Future of Ag and The Modern Acre, a couple of big ones within agriculture that are huge. But also recently in the last year, Substack is something that I've become increasingly tied to. And so Substack is a platform for bloggers. And so there's some fantastic Substacks out there, Upstream Ag and prime futures that are all ag focused, innovation focused, ag tech growth, and really just try to consume some of that every day. One, to stay abreast of what's happening and what people are saying in the marketplace, but also, again, see myself as an aggregator. If I can help make the connections for my clients, that's probably as valuable as some of the services I provide, right? So one, it satisfies my own natural curiosity, but then I try to turn around and offer that back.
Yeah, that's great. There's so many good things in there, and the all in, I listen to that as well. And it is interesting to get the take of people that have a lot of insider knowledge as to what's going on, and to help you put it in perspective and hear their analysis. And yeah, I appreciate the fact that you consider yourself an aggregator. I think that's a great perspective, that part of our job as advisors is to consume the information and then provide it to the clients in a way that's appropriate and digestible to them, so it brings value to them, so that they don't have to go search out all these things. It helps us grow, and then it helps us pour back into them. Oh, excellent stuff. So, and speaking of podcasts, you have a podcast. So tell us about that, how long you've been doing that, and what's the kind of the thesis or the focus of your show?
Yeah, so the show's called the Pacesetter Pod. We are just over a year as of a couple of weeks ago. So it's a weekly podcast, and it was really born of some of that aggregation that I talked about, and then layering in my own leadership and business lessons that I've learned over the course of my career. As I said, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I recognize that there was this whole world of really rich economics and business information out there. And there's this whole separate universe of agronomy and soil health and weather and futures markets and what's happening with ag tech. And there was very little bridging between the two. And I have the luxury of sitting on calls regularly with, founders and chief executives and C-suite folks of my, my target market. And they had all these stories too. And I just realized that, there's so much here that could be told and could be shared that would enrich the discussions happening in the business. The work I do is about helping agribusinesses grow. And if I can enrich the discussions that they're having, and if I can broaden the kinds of information that they're consuming, and I can help equip them to make better and different decisions that support growth, and that's a natural thing to do. And so I just realized that there was no one out there really doing a show that I wanted to hear. I mean, there's a lot of shows I want to hear, but not the one that I was really looking for. I thought, well, it's how hard could it be? Spoiler, it's really, really hard. But I launched it, and we now are, like I said, we're just over a year, and I have the real privilege of having continuing to have a lot of really high impact, deep thinking, respected, sometimes contrarian agribusiness leaders on the show. And we don't get into commercially sensitive information. We don't ask them questions that are going to signal their strategy. But we do try to push and say, okay, what have they learned about strategy execution? What have they learned about M&A? What have they learned about managing growth? What are the things that they feel are really important to successfully leading one of these businesses? And they are gracious with their opinions and their perspectives, and we get to put that out there, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's allowed me to have a lot of conversations I might not otherwise have. And it's been a great new project, and looking forward to the second year now.
Yeah, well, terrific, and congratulations on the first year. It's tough to get. There's some statistic around 90% of podcasts don't get past like their 10th episode. So you're on your way. So good work, and we'll get links to your show and those other podcasts you mentioned in the show notes. So Joe, as we bring it to a close, who should reach out to you, and what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so we are hyper focused on in our market, and so clearly anybody in the agribusiness space or an adjacency, if you're running a equipment dealership that services farm customers, or energy businesses, et cetera, that might be working with farmer customers or with agribusinesses, that's a natural spot. But any folks in small to middle market spaces that are thinking about, we're either trying to grow, we've got a good strategy, but we're having a hard time operationalizing it within our business, that's someone we love to talk to. And also specifically folks that say, hey, we're going to do a transaction, we're going to buy a competitor, we're going to buy a company to help us become vertically integrated or enter a new market, whatever it is. We've heard it's really hard, or we did this a while back and it was really hard. Can you come in and help us? That's people we want to talk to, because again, this work is perfectly designed to episodically help someone. It's not about coming in and being a barnacle that attaches yourself to the business for the next 10 years. You can come in and say, okay, look, you've got a really tough 6 months ahead of you. Let us come in and at least minimize the performance dip, help you get to their side, teach you a few things along the way. We'd be honored to do it, and then we can get out of the way and you get on to what you're doing. So folks that are in that space, we would love to talk to you.
Great. And what's the best way to reach you?
Sure. So online, moshercg.com. So MOSHERCG.com. Also, I'm very active on LinkedIn. And so folks can either find me there or they can set up a call with me directly on our website. And of course, check out the show, Pacesetter Pod.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get the links to your contact info also in the show notes. So Joe, it's been a pleasure. I so appreciate you taking some time to talk with me today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ken. I love what you do. Thank you for doing it. And look forward to continuing to subscribe and listen to the show.
Awesome. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another Clarity Advisor show. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you could be so kind as to leave a review, that helps us to spread the word and get other people exposed to the show. Leave that on the platform you are watching or listening to now, and we will see you next time on the Clarity Advisor Show.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity Advisor Show. Clarity Advisors is a speaking, training, and consulting firm specializing in helping you simplify your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Connect with Clarity Advisors today to learn more about how they can help you improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success.